In Algebra 1, section 8-7, we're dealing with solving quadratic equations again, but this time we're using square root, okay? This comes in handy when you're missing your b. So if you remember, the quadratic equations is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, so this comes in handy when you don't have a b, when you end up with an ax squared plus c, because then you can move the c to the other side and then just square root, and then divide a and square root both sides. Okay? So for example, if I end up with x squared equals 169, well, because of that x squared, I can easily just, in order to solve for x, just square root both sides. Right? So when I square root both sides, the squared cancels out the square roots. I'm left with 8. So then 169 squared is 13. Okay? The long way of solving that is I can bring x to the next, so I have x squared, and then I have no x, and then I have minus 169 equals 0. And then I have to solve this, put it into two bubbles and everything like that. But because there's no, but this is a quicker way using the square root formula, right? Just in case you were wondering why we're teaching you, yeah, another way to the square root in solving a quadratic equation. All right? This one is a little trickier because I do the same thing as I do for that one. I square root both sides, but here's the thing. If you try to plug in this into your calculator, it's going to say error because you cannot square root a negative number. So you end up square rooting a negative number. That means there is no solution. That means the graph does not hit x at all. Okay? No solution when you're ending up with a square root of negative 49. All right? So on this one, again, there's no bx, there's no one letter with just an x, it's an x squared and then just constants. So I'm going to put all the constants on one side and then the x squared on the other. If I do that, I'm going to subtract 7 on both sides. I end up with x squared equals 0. I'm going to square root both sides, so this cancels out with this. I end up with x equals 0. Oh, I apologize. This answer actually is plus or minus 13, right? Because if I were to solve this, x squared plus 0x minus 169, my two bubbles would be x minus 13 and x plus 13. Two numbers when multiplied together gets me negative 169, but when added together gets me 0. That's negative 13 and positive 13. So if I do x minus 13 equals 0, I end up with 13. If I do x plus 13 equals 0, I end up with negative 13. Okay? So it's the same thing. When I square root, it means that if I do 13 times 13, it gives me 169. But when I do negative 13 times negative 13, it still gives me 169. So don't forget that this represents two answers. So if I'm going to square root this, it would be plus or minus 0. But because 0 is neither positive or negative, it doesn't matter, right? So let's apply what I just did here, over here. If you want to take a second, take a look at that. Sorry, I might have said it a little bit too fast. But definitely, whenever I square root, my answer is plus or minus that number, plus or minus 13. Okay? You'll see here if you're kind of lost from over there. So here again, I'm going to put all the constant on one side and everything else on the other. So I'm going to add 49 to both sides, add 49. I end up with 16x squared equals 49. Now, traditionally, I divide both sides by 16 to get x by itself. But I'm just going to square root now because 16 is square rootable. That's correct. So this is, this gives me 8x squared equals plus or minus 7. Right? So my answer is, no, sorry, 4x squared. So I'm going to divide both sides by 4. I end up with x, oh sorry, this cancels out. So this x squared makes this into a 4, and then it also cancels out my x. Okay? So I end up with x equals negative 7 over 4, plus or minus 7 over 4, sorry. Okay, so remember, when I square root it, it's plus or minus. So for this one, again, I'm going to square root both sides. I end up with, this cancels out this, x equals, and this one, there's not a definite answer. Same thing with this one. So you're going to want to put it in decimal. So if you want to put your answers in fraction or decimal, it's up to you. 15 square root is 3.87. So my answer is plus or minus 3.87. And I can check that. If I do 3.87 times 3.87, it should give me 15. If I do negative 3.87 times negative 3.87, it should give me 15, or at least close to 15, because we rounded this answer. All right, the last one. Again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring all the constants to one side. So I'm going to subtract 90 from both sides. I apologize for that. These cancel out. I end up negative 3x squared equals negative 90. Okay? I square rooted this because 16 is square rootable, so then it just did it. But when you want to do it, you should divide so that x squared is by itself, so negative 3. We end up with x squared equals negative and negative cancel out. 90 divided by 3 is 30, positive 30, because the negatives cancel out. And then I'm going to square root both sides. This and this cancel out. I end up with x equals 5.47, oh, sorry, 0.48. And don't forget, it's plus or minus. That plus or minus is important because that then represents two answers and not just one. So plus or minus 5.48. So go ahead and write this down and try. Page 571, number 7, 11, and 14. 571, number 7, 11, 14, and I will see you in class.